Tiananmen Gate is where the founding of New China was declared 60 years ago. It is also a historical landmark of ancient China. It is the front gate of the former imperial palace. The architectural complex behind it represents the ancient history of China's agricultural era, which lasted several thousand years. The leader of New China once stood here to declare to the whole world China was entering a new epoch. However, the future of China remained unknown. Many people wondered, how far would China go? It was a country composed of nearly all peasants. In the past, Chinese people were regarded only as people who worked hard in the fields all year round. In autumn, 59 years later, the Chinese people demonstrated their first historical step into space to the whole world. They are putting satellites in space. About 2,000 years ago, the Chinese people led the world in inventing the sunan, a southward pointing instrument. Today, the Chinese people have their own global positioning satellite system named after the 7 stars of the Great Bear, the Big Dipper. People will never forget that nearly 40 years ago, the voice of the Chinese people came from heaven for the first time. People have never forgotten that when the aerospace project began, Chinese scientists calculated complicated data using primitive calculating tools invented by China's ancestors. The currency of New China is the renminbi. All the theme patterns for the third set of renminbi issued in the early 1960s were images of working people. It was in that era that the holders of this currency, given the reality of 30 years of low wages and the ration system, put the primitive accumulations of the contributions of an entire generation into the establishment of New China. They created the preliminary fundamental industrial system in the vast and poor backward land of China. Since China is the largest country in the world, some people wondered, who will feed China's large population? As they argued, one person who seemed to be a typical Chinese peasant raised the yield of hybrid rice per mu to 900 kilograms. This annual increase in rice output was enough to feed another 70 million people. People should not forget one village. 30 years ago, 18 peasants from this village took the lead in adopting the household contract responsibility system, with remuneration linked to production, marking the prelude to China's rural reform. This added to long-term driving forces to increase grain output. From this year, China entered a new era of reform and opening up to the outside world in an all-around way. This was a historical choice made by New China. Since then, the market economy has become part of people's lives and an important part of the Chinese economic structure. Here, people can directly see their interests and choose to shape their destiny with their own hands. Another right to choose has come to people along with private property. With the emergence of a large number of commercial residential buildings, the owners of real estate have obtained the right to elect a Realty Owners Committee from the community they belong to on the strength of their share of property. Community autonomy has been realized through these elected committees. Elections with more historical significance have been held in rural areas. In 1998, the Villagers' Committee Law of the People's Republic of China was issued. Since then, Chinese peasants have entered an era of democratic autonomy. Chinese peasants had lived in a patriarchal relationship on the basis of ties of blood for several thousand years. The elder member of a village in his authority did not require an election. In 2008, a figure that sociologists looked forward to came quietly. The proportion of peasants among China's 1.3 billion people was reduced to 50%. In terms of the social structure, this marks a fundamental change in China, a traditionally agricultural country. Today, Chinese young people are used to everything before them. However, 30 years ago when their parents were young, everything in China today was a remote dream, in sight, but beyond reach. The most obvious and rapid changes have taken place in China's railways. Over the past decade or so, the speed of trains has been raised 6 times in succession, and the average speed of trains per hour has increased from 48.1 kilometers to 200 kilometers. The Beijing-Tianjin high-speed railway is now open and travels at speeds of 350 kilometers per hour. However, the Chinese people will never forget the first person devoted to building the railways in China, and the first railway he built for his own country at the end of China's last feudal dynasty. Today, China's railway network has reached the roof of the world. On July 1, 2006, the entire rail line from Xining, capital of Qinghai, to Lhasa, capital of Tibet, was open to traffic. With the highest elevation in the world, this railway is 1,956 kilometers long. and travels areas where the soil is perpetually frozen. It takes only 25 hours and 39 minutes to cover the entire route of this train. Some 54 years ago, it took the 10th Panchen Lama of Tibetan Buddhism and his entourage 115 days to make this same journey. When he set out, the 10th Panchen brought over 3,000 camels with him. Along the way, the camels died one after another because of oxygen deficiency and overwork. When they arrived in Lhasa, only about 1,000 camels were left. The 10th Panchen Lama did not see the completion of the Qinghai-Tibet Railway, but the 11th Panchen, his reincarnation, welcomed the day the Qinghai-Tibet Railway was open to traffic. After 13 years of study, the 11th Panchen has started to carry forward the cause of the 10th Panchen. For Chinese Muslims, they also have a journey to heaven they are looking forward to. In 1979, China resumed sending pilgrimage groups. In 2004, China started scheduled pilgrimage flights. In 2008, a total of 11,800 Muslims in China made their pilgrimage to Mecca by plane. In China, with a population of over 1.3 billion people, holding a memorial ceremony for the ancestors of Chinese civilization is a common belief. During this memorial ceremony, important state affairs for the year are included in a funeral oration given to console the ancestors. Therefore, when Hong Kong and Macau were returned to the motherland at the end of the last century, the Chinese people did not forget to set up 2 tablets recording their return in the mausoleum of the ancestors. Beside the 2 tablets, an open space is left for a tablet for Taiwan. The name of the Yellow Emperor, the founder of the 5,000-year history of Chinese civilization, is written at the very top of the historical bronze-paved path, without a doubt. By the end of the last century, the definitive chronological history of China could be traced only as far back as the first year of the Gonghe reign of the Zhou dynasty, 841 BC. In 1996, the Chinese government allocated a great deal of funds to start a 4-year chronology project. Through cross-discipline research in the areas of astronomy, literature, archaeology, and science and technology, the 1,200-year historical period once lost finally entered Chinese chronology in 2000. In 2007, the National Center for the Performing Arts, another landmark building of the new century, was built in Beijing. In this postmodern theater, the first play being performed is neither a modern dance drama nor a famous foreign opera, but a new Yueju opera entitled Liang Shanbo and Zhu Yingtai. This play originated from an ancient, beautiful yet sad legend. A young man and a young woman struggled with their lives for their deep love. Finally, they became two butterflies and married in the other world. As an item of national intangible cultural heritage, the legend of Liang Shanbo and Zhu Yingtai was included in the first group of 518 items of intangible cultural heritage under state protection in 2006. This is a good thing for human civilization. In an ancient country like China, its rich traditional cultural heritage has not been lost in the drive for modernization. In the same way, 3 folk festivals which are part of traditional Chinese culture were designated as legal holidays by the Chinese government in 2008. They are the Pure Brightness Festival for visiting ancestral graves, Dragon Boat Festival to commemorate Qu Yuan, an ancient hero who died for the country, and the Mid-Autumn Festival for family reunions. About 1,000 years ago, movable type was invented by China, making a tremendous contribution to the propagation of human civilization. But in the industrial era, the Chinese character had to face unprecedented difficulties. Fortunately, the information era came just in time. Chinese character encoding technology, invented by a Chinese person, has allowed the only pictograph-based language in the world, used by over 1.3 billion people, to be continually disseminated as part of civilization in the new century. It has retained not only a beautiful typeface, but also the source of civilization and the way of thinking, which can only be carried by Chinese characters. By December 2008, China had set up 7 cultural centers and 249 Confucius Institutes in 78 countries and regions around the world. Spoken and written Chinese language is marching towards the world. The pictograph-based Chinese character finally evolved into an emblem of the Beijing Olympic Games. The 2008 Beijing Olympic Games made it possible for the Chinese people to satisfactorily reply to historical questions raised 100 years ago. First, when will the Chinese people take part in the Olympic Games? In 1932, Liu Changchun alone entered the Olympic Games in Los Angeles. Second, when will the Chinese people win the first gold medal at the Olympic Games? In 1984, Xu Haifeng raised his pistol and shot down the first gold medal. Third, when will the Chinese people host the Olympic Games? Hundreds of millions of Chinese people have waited for that day for a whole century. At that moment, all Chinese people stretched out their arms in warmth to welcome friends and guests from all over the world. This night belonged to China. It was China's night. And on that night, over 1 billion Chinese people were too excited to sleep. In the 60 years since the founding of New China, Chinese people over 3 generations have made painstaking efforts for ancient China to illuminate the East in the new century. Now, ancient China has become blended with the modern world. Chinese people can be seen in every corner of the world. Since 1984, China has established 2 scientific expedition stations in Antarctica, the Great Wall and Zhongshan stations. On January 18, 2005, the Chinese scientific expedition team climbed the highest inland ice cap in Antarctica and collected ice samples that had been sunk in sleep for millions of years for scientific research. In the first few years of the new century, China jointly held a series of Culture Year activities with Russia, France, Italy, and other countries for cultural exchange. The Chinese people believe that through exchange, human cultures should be promoted, merged, coexist, and developed. This is totally different from the theory on cultural conflicts raised by some people. In an era characterized by multicultures and economic globalization, China, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, is increasingly active in walking towards the international stage and participating in international affairs. According to its traditional concept of harmony, China has always played the role of a responsible large country in international relations. Every tourist to Xi'an will see a large number of terracotta warriors and horses made over 2,000 years ago, and will appreciate the power and grandeur of the Chinese army during the cold weapons era. In the modern era, all Chinese officers and soldiers wear blue helmets when they appear in other countries where peacekeeping is needed. This is the glory of the Chinese army. This honor comes from peace rather than from war. Chinese soldiers of New China have another special mission. When a natural disaster strikes, they must rush to the front line without any thought of turning back. Chinese soldiers have fought against 4 natural disasters over the past decade. Their actions precisely demonstrate the words of China's national anthem. With our flesh and blood, let us build our new Great Wall. Frequent natural disasters provide a warning to human civilization. Choosing between economic development and environmental protection is a dilemma for all countries around the world, especially for a developing country like China. With faith in being responsible to ourselves, to the world, and to the future, the Chinese government resolutely put forward the policy of restoring cultivated land, replacing crop farming with the planting of grass, and restoring lakes from farmland in 1998. On the basis of economic development with sufficient grain, the Chinese government guaranteed the implementation of an environmental protection project with state subsidies and grain supply. In the world today, characterized by economic globalization and multicultures, many contradictions have brought people's attention to 2 Chinese philosophers who lived 2,000 years ago. Lao Tzu told the people, "Man takes earth as his model, earth takes heaven as its model, heaven takes the way as its model, and the way takes what is natural as its model." Lao Tzu regarded human beings as one species of all things on earth, and all things on earth should allow nature to take its course. Confucius, who lived in the same era as Lao Tzu, put forward the political concept of cooperation and harmony. This means that if cooperation can be realized between people, it will result in a harmonious situation, an ideal realm for all people. Today, we can see that as China marches towards modernization, the quintessence of its traditional culture is constantly being remade anew. According to traditional Chinese culture, every 60 years is regarded as one cycle, and a reincarnation will be realized in the cycle of 60 years. Perhaps we cannot say that this is merely a coincidence. However, in the first cycle of 60 years, New China has truly realized a historical leap.